Senator JD Vance leaned into the mic and smirked. $100 million for hurting the feelings of a man in a red coat. The courtroom chuckled, cameras flashed. What Vance didn't realize was that the man suing him wasn't after money. He was about to expose a secret buried for over a decade, and once it was spoken out loud, it didn't just damage Vance's career, it detonated it. Now, before we show you what was said, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Let's get into it. The royal courts of justice don't usually see cases like this one. Most defamation claims involve celebrities or business disputes, not a retired Coldstream Guard taking on an American senator. But there it was on the docket that October morning, Corporal Ezra Flint versus Senator James David Vance. Outside, autumn had settled over London with that particular sharpness that makes reporters pull their coats tighter while they wait behind barriers. The American press crews had flown in specifically for this. Vance was in town for a speaking circuit, and nobody expected much from what seemed like a wounded pride lawsuit. The marble halls echoed differently when the crowds were this thin. Not empty exactly, but filled with the kind of murmurs that happen when people aren't quite sure what they're witnessing. The courtroom itself felt oddly intimate for such a public proceeding. When the court clerk read the case details aloud, there was something almost surreal about hearing those names together. On one side, a man most people had never heard of. On the other, a senator whose face had been on magazine covers, Ezra Flint, stood alone at the claimant's table. At 47, he carried himself with the particular stillness of someone who'd spent decades learning not to move unless necessary. His ceremonial dress uniform was immaculate. The red tunic pressed to razor creases, white gloves spotless, the famous bearskin hat resting carefully on the bench beside him. No barista, no assistants shuffling papers, just him. The contrast was almost comical. Vance's side of the courtroom looked like a small army. 3 barristers, 2 assistants, stacks of documents that suggested they'd come prepared for war, rather than what should have been a simple hearing about hurt feelings. JD Vance himself radiated that particular American confidence that fills rooms before words are even spoken. His navy suit was perfectly tailored, his posture relaxed but commanding. As he waited for proceedings to begin, he turned slightly toward his lead counsel. "How long do we expect this to take?" he asked in a stage whisper that half the press gallery could hear. 30 minutes. "Maybe 45, came the quiet reply. "He's representing himself. No legal training. Should be straightforward." Vance nodded with satisfaction. When the judge gestured for introductions, he leaned toward his microphone with the ease of someone accustomed to having his voice carry weight. "Your Honor, I'd like to begin by stating clearly that I have tremendous respect for the British people and their institutions." His voice had that practiced political cadence, measured but conversational. However, this lawsuit represents a fundamental misunderstanding of what was clearly intended as light-hearted commentary. The courtroom screens flickered as his legal team queued up their prepared evidence. The clip was from 2 weeks earlier. Vance at a podium speaking to what looked like a corporate dinner crowd. "You know, I saw those guards outside Buckingham Palace," his recorded voice said, pausing for the chuckles that came right on cue. "I thought that's a lot of taxpayer money for a bunch of well-dressed lawn ornaments." More laughter, then the punchline. "But hey, at least they're good at standing still. Maybe we should borrow one for Congress." The audience in the clip ate it up. A few people in the actual courtroom seemed to suppress smiles. Flint's expression didn't change, not so much as a blink. With respect to Mr. Flint, Vance continued after the clip ended. "We live in an era where free speech includes the right to satirical commentary. That's not just American values, that's democratic values." He was hitting his stride now, playing to what he clearly saw as his audience. The confidence was infectious, even in a British courtroom where American political theater didn't usually play well. "And let's be honest here," Vance added with a slight theatrical tilt of his head toward the press gallery. Standing guard outside a gate, however ceremonially important, doesn't exactly qualify as battlefield heroics. One of his lawyers leaned forward urgently. "Senator," he whispered, "perhaps we should. It's fine." Vance cut him off, still speaking into the microphone. "I am simply pointing out that there's a difference between actual military service and well-performance art." He gestured vaguely toward Flint, however well executed that performance might be. What nobody in that room understood yet, including Vance's meticulously prepared legal team, was that Ezra Flint hadn't come to defend his hurt feelings. He'd come to reveal something that was never supposed to see daylight in a public courtroom. When the judge turned to him and said, "Mr. Flint, you may respond when ready," the silence that followed wasn't hesitation. It was precision. The silence of someone who'd been waiting years for exactly this moment and wasn't about to waste a single word of it. Vance seemed to settle back in his chair, one leg crossing over the other with casual authority. He'd found his rhythm, and everything about his posture suggested he believed the hardest part was over. "I've been in government long enough to recognize when people take things more seriously than they were intended," he said. Voice carrying that particular tone politicians use when they want to sound reasonable while dismissing opposition. This case, frankly, is about wounded pride, not legitimate grievance. His legal team handed him a slim folder. He opened it with a kind of theatrical precision that suggested they'd rehearsed this moment. His lips curved slightly as he selected a particular page. "If it pleases the court, I'd like to submit several public responses to my comments, including this gem from a British columnist who wrote, and I quote, 'Perhaps our royal guards could use a little humor. Their faces have been scaring tourists for centuries.'" A few chuckles rippled through the gallery, not loud, but audible enough to suggest that Vance was reading the room correctly. Flint remained perfectly still at his table, hands clasped loosely in front of him. His face revealed nothing. Not anger, not embarrassment, not even interest in what was being said about him. Vance closed the folder with a satisfied snap. "Look, I don't question Corporal Flint's service record. I'm sure he performed his duties with honor, but the changing of the guard is fundamentally a tourist attraction. It's pageantry. Oh, no one seriously believes these men are elite commandos, and my comment about lawn ornaments was obviously satirical in nature." He paused, letting that sink in before delivering what he clearly considered his strongest point. "No one was harmed by my words, unless we're now legally required to protect people's feelings from mild comedy." The judge's voice cut through the smugness with surgical precision. "Mr. Vance, I'll remind you that this is a court of the law, not a press conference." "Of course, Your Honor. My apologies. However, since you've submitted commentary as evidence, the court will naturally allow for proper rebuttal under oath." Something subtle shifted in the air at those words. Not dramatic, more like the moment before a gear clicks into place. Vance adjusted his tie and pressed on. "The fundamental issue here is that I wasn't mocking an individual. I was commenting on a ceremonial tradition that, let's be frank, exists more for tourism than for actual security British taxpayers fund it. Tourists photograph it, and if someone's ego gets bruised by gentle ribbing, well, that's unfortunate, but it's not a legal matter." He delivered the last part while looking directly at Flint, clearly expecting some kind of reaction. Maybe anger, maybe indignation, maybe just the satisfaction of seeing his target squirm. He got nothing, not even acknowledgement that he'd spoken. The silence stretched long enough to become uncomfortable. In the press gallery, reporters started exchanging glances. This was supposed to be David versus Goliath, but David wasn't even picking up his sling. A few whispered conversations started in the back rows. Is that really all he's got? He's not even fighting back. This will be over in 10 minutes. But Flint's stillness wasn't defeat. Anyone who'd spent time around soldiers would have recognized it as something else entirely. The particular calm that comes before action, not after surrender. When the judge finally said, "Mr. Flint, the floor is yours," he didn't leap up or stride dramatically to the witness stand. He simply rose with the measured precision of someone accustomed to movements being watched and judged. He removed his bearskin hat and placed it carefully on the railing. His footsteps on the marble were quiet, but somehow seemed to echo anyway. As he passed Vance's table, the senator gave him a sideways look that clearly communicated, "Let's see what you've got." Flint climbed the steps to the witness stand, turned to face the room, and spoke his first words of the day. Not a speech, not a declaration, just a single quiet sentence that somehow managed to change everything. "I didn't sue because I was offended. I sued because you told a lie that people believed. No legal jargon, no emotional appeals, just that." And suddenly Vance's confident smirk faltered. Not dramatically. Just enough to suggest that maybe this wasn't going to play out exactly as rehearsed, because the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was loaded. And everyone in that courtroom, including JD Vance, was about to discover what 30 years of keeping quiet had been protecting Ezra Flint. Settled into the witness chair without fanfare. No counsel beside him, no prepared statements, no stack of exhibits. Just a single folded document resting on the ledge in front of him, and the kind of presence that comes from decades of being observed without being seen. "I'd like to make a statement under oath," he said simply. The judge nodded. "Proceed, Corporal Flint." His voice didn't strain to fill the room. It barely needed to travel, yet somehow it reached every corner with perfect clarity. I wasn't decorated for most of what I did, and I never expected to be. The uniform most people see, the red tunic, the ceremony. They think it's all for show. Maybe some of it is, but not all of it. He looked down briefly at his hands, still wearing the white ceremonial gloves. Several years ago, during a routine changing of the guard at Windsor, there was a diplomat in the crowd, foreign consulate, visiting unofficially. Her presence wasn't announced to the public. We'd been quietly briefed to expect additional security that day, but most of us weren't told specifics. Vance shifted in his chair, arms still crossed, but attention clearly focused now. The casual confidence was still there, but tempered with something that might have been actual curiosity. I was stationed at the north corner, directly in sight of the main archway. Summer day, high tourist volume. Everyone had their phones out, taking pictures. The usual crowd behavior we're trained to monitor. Flint reached for his folded document, but didn't open it yet. I noticed someone, man in his 40s, wearing what looked like a Ministry of Defense contractor badge. But the design was wrong. 3 years out of date, and he wasn't watching the ceremony like everyone else. He was tracking the diplomat's movement. The courtroom had gone completely still. Even the court reporter seemed to be typing more quietly. I made a judgment call, broke formation, walked off my assigned position. Not quickly. Nothing that would alarm civilians. People probably thought I was correcting someone who'd stepped over the barrier lines. The cameras caught it. I'm sure you can probably find footage online of tourists thinking I was part of the show. He tapped the document once against his knee, but I wasn't performing for anyone. Now the silence felt different. Not anticipatory, but focused like a room holding its breath. I didn't radio for backup, didn't draw any weapon. Just got close enough to intercept. And what I discovered in his bag, his eyes lifted now, scanning the courtroom calmly, was a concealed recording device. Detailed floor plans of the diplomatic residence and what our explosives team later identified as components for an improvised incendiary device. A sharp intake of breath came from someone in the gallery. The suspect had been tracking the diplomat's schedule for 3 weeks. He knew her route, her timing, her security detail. What he hadn't planned for was someone breaking protocol to investigate a badge that was 3 years out of date. Flint paused, letting that settle. The incident required immediate containment. It never made news because we were specifically instructed that it couldn't. The judge leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Flint, is this testimony corroborated by official sources?" He nodded once. "It is." He unfolded the paper. "This is a declassified communication from the security service released just 2 weeks ago, following a formal request made through my member of parliament. It confirms the incident, the suspect's intentions, and specifies that my intervention prevented what could have been a significant diplomatic crisis. The court clear approached and accepted the document. The room held its breath as the file changed hands. "Would you read the highlighted portion?" Flint asked. The judge read, "Corporal Ezra Flint's intervention on the 17th of March 2014, conducted without overt force, directly prevented a probable attack on a protected diplomat, averting a diplomatic incident. Actions were carried out with exemplary discretion in accordance with national security protocols." A ripple moved through the gallery. Vance leaned forward. Flint let the words settle. "I didn't bring this for money or recognition," he said. "Your joke was used to diminish what we were asked to protect. I served 30 years. I've stood by the graves of men who earned more medals in fewer years. I never asked anyone to applaud, but I won't let you erase what we did." He rose, final. "Sometimes the most important work looks like nothing at all." He returned to his seat. The courtroom stayed still. Vance went silent. When he finally spoke, he ventured that if the incident mattered, it would be widely known. The judge lifted an eyebrow. "Should classified operations be subject to public relations, Mr. Vance?" Flint didn't turn. "The men I served with didn't survive on public approval. They survived on trust." "No further questions," the judge said. A woman stood in the back. "He saved my mother." The air changed. Less drama, more truth. The judge adjourned, promising a written ruling. People filed out slowly, like leaving a memorial. Vance sat, composure cracked. Outside, Flint faced the press. "There are men who died wearing this uniform. I don't wear it lightly." Then he left in a taxi truths. Once spoken, changed the air. Reputations shift before verdicts. Ceremony is not the same as service. Performance is not protection. Dignity does not shout. It stands, speaks, and lets the silence confirm it.